The Declaration of Independence has to do with democracy in three main ways. The first way is that it writes with the voice of we, the people of the colonies. It's creating the American people. So the Declaration is mostly written by one guy, Thomas Jefferson. It's edited by a committee and it's voted on by the Continental Congress. But the delegates there really cared if the American people wanted to be independent, and they took pains to go and ask people to write letters, listen to petitions coming from all the colonies. So in this way, the process of making the Declaration of Independence was a democratic process in the sense that you had a government that was going out, talking to people, listening to what people wanted, and then making a decision for them. That's the first way. The second way that the Declaration of Independence has to do with democracy is the Declaration says that the government needs to be based on consent of the people. And what that means basically is that the government needs to ask the people whether they want that government and whether the government is doing what they want them to do. American colonists felt like the British monarchy was not asking their consent and that it was time for them to form a new government that would be based on their consent. The other part of that is that they wanted a government that was based on securing rights for the people under that government, mainly the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is also really key to democracy, the idea that the government is there to protect people pursuing their rights. That's the second thing. The third way that the Declaration of Independence has to do with democracy is that it declares in the preamble that all men are created equal. That this has been used throughout our country's history by different groups and different people to claim their rights in our country. So the Declaration of Independence was used by African Americans fighting for the abolition of slavery, by women who were fighting for the right to vote, and throughout our country's history for people to assert their rights and their membership as equals in the American community. The Declaration is related to Thomas Paine's big hit pamphlet, Common Sense, in a few different ways. The first thing is just to think about how before the Declaration of Independence was actually declared, the colonists and the British had actually engaged in several battles already. There was fighting going on. But the colonists were a little bit nervous and wanted to be sure before they declared independence. So in January of 1776, Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, came out. And it really changed public opinion and gave momentum toward independence. And in his pamphlet, he addressed the colonists on a big scale. And he wrote about how he thought it was silly that a continent would be governed by a little island across an ocean. But the most important thing that Thomas Paine said in that pamphlet is that it's not natural for people to have a hierarchy among them. So he wrote about how everyone is equal, and that he wrote that having a king or a queen was ridiculous, and that having someone in power over people just because they're born into a certain family is not natural. So when he wrote things like that, he got Americans kind of thinking about how monarchy, the style of government of the British Empire, was unnatural, actually. And it pushed people to think about how self-government, democracy, might be possible in the American colonies. So the Declaration of Independence picks up a little bit on some of these themes by talking about having a government based on consent and by breaking ties with the British monarchy. So we might think of the Declaration of Independence as being mostly written by one person, Thomas Jefferson, and again, voted on by the Continental Congress. So a smaller group of delegates sent from all the colonies to think about these questions. There are a few ways that we might think about it as a broader process, though. Those delegates were sent to the Continental Congress by colonial assemblies or congresses formed in the colonies as they are trying to make decisions about what they're going to do in this conflict with the British. So it's not like everyone came and had an election and voted for their delegates to the Continental Congress. But these representative bodies that people had voted for in the colonies, they did choose people to send to Philadelphia and make these decisions. So that's one way it's a bigger process. The other way is the delegates, like I said before, waited a pretty long time before they declared independence. They wanted to be sure that a majority of Americans supported their decision. And to do that, before they declared independence, A lot of them went back to their colonies, or they sent letters to people back in their home colonies to try to ask, hey, do people want to do this, before they took a vote on independence? So that's also part of the process. People in the colonies also, in the spring of 1776, were sending in petitions, passing resolutions, having demonstrations in their colonies, asking their delegates to declare independence. So it's a little bit hard because it's a period before public opinion polling or social media like we have today. So it was a little hard maybe for the delegates to figure out what a majority of people wanted. But they really did try to do that, and listen to people, and people tried to make their voices heard. So in that way, we can think about the Declaration as a result of a process of people having discussions and talking to elected officials and making their voice heard, which is something that is really democratic. So like I said, they didn't have an election where everyone came and voted on this like we might expect today, but it's the beginning of moving toward a system that is more like that, like something we recognize today as a democracy. So loyalists in the American Revolution were colonists who decided that they would rather stay in the British Empire or side with the British for many reasons. There were loyalists of all kind of classes, races, and different backgrounds. So they were kind of throughout the colonies. After the revolution was over, some of the loyalists decided that they wanted to leave with the British, and a lot of them resettled in different parts of the British Empire, often with the help of the British government. So there was one set that left, but a lot of loyalists remained in the new independent states, and went on with their lives and made their homes in the new United States as it became a country. Sometimes they did face hardship. A lot of them had lost their property during the war or weren't allowed to participate in new governments for a while. So it's a difficult process. The war split towns, even families, kind of apart onto different sides. So afterward, it was a process for people to come back together and reconcile. But there were loyalists who stayed and became Americans after the war. There are two things about the Declaration of Independence that I wish more people knew or thought about. One is that the Declaration is more ending something than starting something new. So the main point of the Declaration is to break away from the British Empire. And it lays some foundations for what's going to come next, but it doesn't give a lot of details. That's something that comes later with the Constitution. So that's one thing. The second thing that I wish people knew about the Declaration of Independence, or thought about a little bit more, is the audience for this document. We read it today and we think, of course, the audience is the American people, and we use this document. It means a lot to our country and to us in our country. That is one audience for the Declaration, but the audience also was the British government. The colonists wanted to explain why they were leaving, and they wanted to justify their decision. They also wanted to justify that decision to the British people, who till then they considered, part of their culture and their community. And so this was a big break, and they wanted to make sure people understood why they were doing it. And the last important audience for the Declaration is the other countries and empires in the world at the time. The Americans knew they were going to need help and allies if they were going to fight the British Empire and establish their independence. And so this document is also aimed at getting friends and allies on the side of the Americans in the struggle that was going to come. Now that you know so much more about the Declaration of Independence and what it has to do with democracy, how does living in a democracy matter to you and your family?